PriorityVax is an online tool to support a process of priority setting and decision-making about vaccines that is tractable, transparent, and evidence-informed. With PriorityVax, you can capture the deliberative process about opinions, drivers, and rationale for a decision, including how evidence is used as you move from data to recommendation. PriorityVax can be used by any stakeholder with an interest in vaccine priority setting, but it is most useful to those who want to follow an evidence-to-recommendation framework.
In this use case, we will look at entering evidence from a grade evaluation, using PriorityVax to explore the diversity of opinions within a committee, and producing a shareable report from PriorityVax. Our example is based on the experiences of the Ugandan NITAG, who were asked by the Ugandan Ministry of Health to advise on the introduction of 5 new vaccines into their routine expanded programme of immunization. 2 aspects of the request are especially important. First, the desire to use the best possible evidence to inform any decision, and second, the need to prioritise the introduction of any vaccine. Underlying the request was the recognition that, although there are global recommendations about which vaccine to introduce, the Ugandan Ministry of Health wants to make the best possible and sustainable decisions using expert guidance, and specifically expert guidance that understands the particular circumstances and national context in Uganda. The Ugandan NITAG started by looking at an adapted evidence-to-recommendation framework developed by the Supporting Independent Immunization and Vaccine Advisory Committee, or CIVAC. They used PriorityVax in parallel with this framework, and there was a distinct added value in doing so. One of the key differences was that the CIVAC framework was really built to look at vaccines separately. So while the recommendation is a yes-no prioritisation, the type of question asked and the type of evidence gathered were not necessarily comparable between vaccines, and hence it wasn't a fair head-to-head comparison. Here we join them after they have conducted systematic reviews and gathered the appropriate evidence. The vaccines under consideration were to have a second dose of measles-containing vaccine, a routine meningococcal A vaccine, a change from tetanus toxoid to tetanus diphtheria vaccine, and a nationwide yellow fever vaccine. We enter profiles for each of these vaccines into PriorityVax, and it is worth noting at this point that the NITAG decided that an additional vaccine, a hepatitis B birth dose, had insufficient evidence to review and specifically to reflect the situation in Uganda. So rather than enter it into a prioritisation now, they left it for a future date. In the CIVAC framework, PICO questions were used to guide the collection of evidence, and sub-questions were used to shape the systematic reviews. For example, the potential for epidemics, vaccine safety, the feasibility of delivering a vaccine. But the decision criteria themselves were considered equally important, and this is reflected in PriorityVax by giving them equal weight. We shall return to this because discussion about this point was the most important contribution that PriorityVax made to the process. Since PriorityVax was run to mimic the CIVAC process, assessment criteria were replicated and given a similar scale to the grade scoring system. Here, for example, we make an attribute to reflect the benefits to the recipients of introducing vaccine. This criterion was meant to capture protection from disease. We made it like a Likert scale, and to give more nuance, we multiplied that scale by 10. The other criteria were the burden of disease, which might include mortality and morbidity, the geographic age distribution, and any particular risk groups. Economic and operational issues, and in particular the cost-effectiveness and affordability of the vaccine. And last, programmatic and policy considerations, for example, issues of diversity, equity, and acceptability. The scores from the grade evaluation could then be entered. These grade scores represent our evidence, and in this case high values reflect strong evidence and low values reflect weak evidence. Note that while numerical evidence is entered specific for each vaccine, the criteria are the same for each, so they're still comparable. Crucially, because we entered data for our user-defined attributes, we can add citations for all the sources of information that we used. These citations, as we'll see a little later, are automatically included in the report that PriorityVax generates. This means that the link between evidence and recommendation can be retained, and the process is tractable. Once we click the Analyze button, it takes moments to produce results. These scores give the sum of the evidence for the weighted criteria, and they are relative, so the interpretation of an absolute difference forms part of the discussion rather than reflect any statistical significance. You'll see notes on the panel on the right-hand side. These show the summary of scores for each of the attributes, corresponding to the highlighted blue bar on the graph. As we hover over each bar, these details change, so we get a snapshot of what drives each vaccine. A principal feature of PriorityVax is the ability to reconfigure the analysis. Both the weights of the criteria and the evidence can be changed, allowing users to explore the influence of both uncertainty in the data, as well as sensitivity to the decision criteria weights. In this case, we'll review the latter, the relative importance of the criteria weights. For our first run of the model, we use equal weights, just like the CIVAC framework. Then in the next round, we can enter consensus values from the NITAG. These were the average weights from the individual members. Each member of the NITAG was asked to give a percent importance to each criterion. For example, their average scores showed that they weighted severity of disease higher than economic benefit of a vaccine. By changing the weights, and note that the evidence remains exactly the same, the rank importance of the vaccines is changing. From having 3 vaccines with essentially the same score, we can now see a differentiation between options, and this reflects the expert opinions within the NITAG. If we reconfigure this one last time, we can pick out one particular opinion to illustrate, for example, how a committee might explore individual opinions to reconcile evidence or a debate. The ex officio members of the committee came from different institutions, the WHO Regional Office, UNICEF and EPI. They tended to have interests informed by multilateral positions and perspectives, and these members had a more diverse opinion than the core NITAG members. Opinions that reflected their institutional position and the perspectives, but grounded largely in a national level focus. One member from the EPI, for example, felt that economic loss might be less important than operationally delivering a vaccine. For example, one might assume that funding or co-funding could be found, so what determines success is whether there are appropriate health systems to actually deliver the new vaccine. We can explore the impact of such an opinion, and it turns out that in this case, by downplaying the economic considerations and dramatically increasing the importance of programmatic issues, the measles vaccine is decidedly less favoured, and the meningococcal vaccine is given greater priority. All this adds richness to the discussion and suggests a nuance to the recommendations. It also provides a transparent account of the deliberation process, because all of this, the evidence, the scores, the different reconfigurations, can be collated through the PriorityVax reporting function, allowing for sharing of these results to support communications about a final recommendation. The PriorityVax report includes a graphical summary, but perhaps more important is what might be called the decision matrix. This table, one for each vaccine, includes all of the assumptions, the weights of the attributes, the range of possible values from worst to best, which are then used to determine how evidence is turned into a relative value, the evidence itself, and finally the breakdown of the scores. Critically, at the end of this report is the bibliography of all the evidence cited. The NITAG included the PriorityVax results in their report to the Ministry of Health, and PriorityVax helped them to explore the range of opinions of the committee and to bring some resolution to the tied ranks that resulted from the CIVAC process. The recommendations in the report were accepted in full by the Ministry of Health, and in fact, the Ministry forewent several rounds of Gavi deadlines in order to give the NITAG adequate time to produce the best possible evidence-informed recommendations. Furthermore, the Ministry have made more recent requests, including whether any new evidence for hepatitis B might be integrated into new recommendations, and that could easily be done by reconfiguring the analysis with all the previous data stored in the programme.